The white cleaning crew van of Belle Reve Cleaning Services pulled up to the South Service entrance of the Magnolia Tower on Poydras Street in downtown New Orleans at 5:53 on a humid Wednesday morning in late September. The van was a 2009 Ford E350 with a small cream and magnolia logo painted on the side panel and a small, soft, hand-lettered sign on the back door reading, "We clean by the light of the Lord." The van's driver, a kind, broad-shouldered Creole gentleman of 51 named Mr. Robichaud Saunier, who had been the third-shift Belle Reve driver for 19 years, parked carefully against the Service Bay curb, set the parking brake, and turned in his seat to look back at the 6 women on the bench seats behind him. "Ladies, 5:53. The freight elevator is, by my watch, 3 minutes off. Ms. Lefranc, carry on." Miss Leonie Lefranc, the senior third-shift supervisor of Belle Reve Cleaning Services, 71 years old that September, who had been at Belle Reve for 34 years and at the Magnolia Tower account for the entirety of those 34, said only, in her soft, careful, low St. Augustine Catholic Church, choir mistress voice, "Ladies, the lobby first, the 35th floor archives second, kitchen pantries third. We are out by 1:55. Walk slow. The Lord, ladies, has the time." The 6 women had said, "Yes, Ms. Lefranc." The third of the 6 women on the bench, seated by the right rear sliding door with a small, worn green canvas tote bag on her lap and a small, folded blue and white striped Belle Reve uniform shirt pinned to the front of her own gray cotton button-down, was a 32-year-old African-American woman, 5 feet and 6 inches tall, full-figured plus-size build carried with the calm, steady, patient posture her grandmother on the St. Bernard Parish back porch had taught her, with warm, medium-brown skin, large, dark, almond-shaped eyes that looked out at the world with the careful watchfulness of a woman who had, on the day she had washed up at the Boudreaux shrimp dock at the Pointe-aux-Chenes Inlet on the morning of the 17th of August 4 years and 3 months earlier, lost the use of every memory she had ever had. Her name on the worn driver's license inside the small, worn green canvas tote bag at her feet, an ID issued to her by the Louisiana Department of Motor Vehicles in Houma on the 8th of October 4 years earlier, in a small, careful name a kind, soft-eyed Houma hospital social worker named Mrs. Annette Doucet had given her at the small, careful Terrebonne General Medical Center on the morning she had woken on the ward not knowing her own name, was Miss Cecile Bertrand. She had, in the 4 years and 3 months since, been Miss Cecile Bertrand of Houma, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, an evening cleaning attendant at the Cypress Inn Motel off U.S. Highway 90, a quiet church-going member of St. Anthony Catholic Mission on Plant Avenue, and the small, soft, careful renter of a small, clean 2-room apartment above the Boudreaux family's small shrimp dock office at the Pointe-aux-Chenes Inlet, at a small, careful $325 monthly rent the Boudreaux had not raised on her in 4 years. She had not, in those 4 years and 3 months, remembered her real name. Her real name, on a Louisiana civil court order filed in Orleans Parish on the 17th of February, 3 years and 7 months earlier, was Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert, the only daughter of the late Mr. Maximilien Beaumarchais of the Beaumarchais family of Esplanade Avenue, and the wife, declared by that same order to be the surviving widow no longer of Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert, founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of Magnolia Maritime Holdings, the 61-year-old New Orleans-based shipping and port services concern headquartered in the 33-story limestone and glass Magnolia Tower on Poydras Street, at which Miss Cecile Bertrand had, on the morning of the 24th of August 5 weeks earlier, begun her small, careful third-shift cleaning rotation under the careful supervision of Miss Leonie Lefranc. Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais. Hébert had, 4 years and 3 months earlier, on a humid Saturday morning in mid-August, taken out alone the small 22-foot Catalina sailboat her late father had given her on her 21st birthday. The boat she had named Marisol after her late grandmother. On the long, careful loop of Lake Pontchartrain she had been taking on most Saturday mornings since her 10th birthday, from the small Chifuncte River Marina in Madisonville. She had been, on the morning of the 12th of August, 2 months pregnant with her and Marius's first child. She had not yet told Marius. She had been, on the morning of the 12th, intending to tell Marius at supper that Saturday evening, at the small, careful supper she had, with great unhurried care, asked the Esplanade Avenue housekeeper, Mrs. Hortense Lavalier, a kind, soft-eyed Creole woman of 62 who had been the housekeeper since 2004, to roast a small, careful chicken with rosemary and Cajun rice. Aurélie had bought, the previous Friday afternoon at a small, careful baby and children's boutique on Magazine Street, a small, soft yellow knit baby hat, the size of a peach. The hat had been, on the Friday evening, in a small, careful, folded white tissue paper, inside a small, careful navy blue gift box on the small side table in the front foyer of the Esplanade Avenue house, waiting to be brought out, with the chicken on the Saturday evening at supper. The thunderstorm that had come up over Lake Pontchartrain on the afternoon of the 12th had not, on the National Weather Service's morning forecast, been on the morning forecast at all. It had blown in off the Gulf of Mexico at 4:11 in the afternoon, had crossed the lake from the east in 23 minutes, and had arrived at the small Catalina sailboat by then 5.5 nautical miles out from the Chifuncte River Marina, with its sails still up at 4:34. The wind had gusted on the Coast Guard's later post-incident report at 61 knots. The mast had snapped at the second spreader. The boat had, on the snap, come up into the wind, taken green water across the cockpit, and on the third gust capsized fully to its starboard side. Aurélie, who had been at the tiller, who had been wearing the small inflatable belt-pack life jacket she always wore but had not, in the wet, humid August morning, remembered to inflate as the storm had hit, had been thrown clear of the cockpit in the third gust. The inflation cord on the belt pack had caught on a stainless steel cleat as she had gone over the side. The bladder had inflated empty at the cleat. Aurélie had gone into the lake without the bladder. The Coast Guard had searched, with 3 boats and a helicopter, until 10 o'clock that night. They had found the sailboat overturned at 5:43 in the evening. They had not found Aurélie. They had searched again on the 13th, and on the 14th, and on the 15th. They had not found her. The current on Lake Pontchartrain had, on the afternoon of the 12th, been moving east toward the Rigolets. The Rigolets had emptied into Lake Borgne. Lake Borgne had emptied into the western Mississippi Sound. The Coast Guard had, at noon on the 17th, called the search. Aurélie had not, in fact, gone east through the Rigolets. Aurélie had been pulled on the late afternoon of the 12th by the same gust that had snapped the mast into the small, careful southeastern eddy that flowed past the southern shore of Lake Pontchartrain into the Bayou Saint John mouth, and from there along the eastern shore down toward the Industrial Canal. She had, with the small, careful, unstoppable persistence of a 32-year-old woman who had been a junior swim team captain at Ursuline Academy, swum against the wind for 1.5 hours. At 6:04 she had, after striking her right temple against a partly submerged piling at the Industrial Canal mouth, lost consciousness. She had floated, face up on the careful, unconscious buoyancy of her own full figure and her own warm, August-fed body fat, southeast across the small, careful, narrow western edge of Lake Borgne, through the night, and had washed up at 4:37 on the morning of the 17th of August, on the soft mud bank of the Pointe-aux-Chênes inlet at the Boudreaux Shrimp Dock, 53 miles south of where she had gone over. Mr. Bertrand Boudreaux, 68 years old, who had been at the Boudreaux Shrimp Dock at 4:37 on the morning of the 17th, because he was, on most Friday mornings, at the dock at 4:37, had, on hearing the soft, careful, unmistakable sound of a body washing onto the soft mud bank, walked in the small, slow, careful unhurriedness of a 68-year-old Cajun shrimp dock owner, the 11 steps from the dock office to the bank. He had pulled, with the help of his 66-year-old wife, Mrs. Hortense Boudreau, the unconscious 32-year-old woman from the soft mud bank. He had said on her soft, careful first stirring, "Cher, we are taking you, Cher, to Dr. Lacombe at Terrebonne General. Hold on, Hortense, get the truck." Aurélie had not, in those first stirrings, been able to say her own name. She had not been able, on the careful subsequent admission paperwork at Terrebonne General Medical Center 2 hours and 17 minutes later, to say her own name. She had not been able on the morning of the 18th, when she had, at last, opened her eyes fully on the small, careful, pale green hospital ward, to say her own name. She had not been able, on the morning of the 19th, the 20th, the 21st. Dr. Inez Lacombe, the kind, soft-eyed 63-year-old Terrebonne general attending neurologist, had, on the morning of the 22nd of August, after a careful CT scan and a careful neurological evaluation and a careful conversation with a Huma-based forensic psychiatry consultant named Dr. Lyle Hyacinth, told Mrs. Hortense Boudreau, who had been at the bedside every morning since the 17th, "Hortense, the young woman has, on the strike to the right temple at the piling, suffered a small, careful focal traumatic injury and a small, careful generalized concussive event, and a small, careful, in my private opinion, dissociative amnesia response to the small, careful, unspecified event that put her in the lake. She does not on this morning know who she is. She may on some future morning remember. She may not. The brain or tense in such cases sometimes finds the memory back. Sometimes it does not. We will, in the meantime, need to give her a name. Mrs. Annette Doucet, the kind, soft-eyed 48-year-old Terrebonne General Hospital social worker who had been on the Terrebonne General staff for 22 years and who had, in those 22 years, given 14 Jane Does 14 small, careful, temporary names, had, on the morning of the 23rd of August, sat down on the small visitor's chair at the bedside of the soft-eyed 32-year-old woman who had not, in 7 days, been able to say her name, and had said very gently, "Cher, the Lord, in my private opinion, will, on some other morning, give you back the name your mama gave you. Until that morning, Cher, I am going to give you the small, careful, temporary name my mother, in 1972, gave to a Jane Doe at Charity Hospital in New Orleans who turned out, 3 months later, to have been a young woman from Lafayette who had been hit by a car. The Jane Doe at Charity Hospital, on the morning of the 3rd month, had remembered her own name. She had, on hearing the small, careful, temporary name my mother had given her, kept the temporary name as a small, careful middle name for the rest of her life. The temporary name, Cher, is Cecile. I will, with your permission, have the front desk write the temporary name with the small, careful surname Bertrand from a great aunt of mine on Bayou Black, on your hospital bracelet at noon today. We will, Cher, see what the Lord brings back." The 32-year-old woman with no memory had said, very softly, "Mrs. Doucet, Cecile Bertrand, yes." The Louisiana Department of Motor Vehicles in Houma had, on the 8th of October, on the strength of a careful affidavit from Mrs. Annette Doucet, issued a temporary state ID in the name of Cecile Bertrand. The Louisiana Department of Public Health had, on the 2nd of November, on the strength of the same affidavit, issued a temporary Louisiana Social Security eligibility document. Cecile Bertrand had, on the 14th of November, taken a small evening cleaning attendant position at the Cypress Inn Motel off U.S. Highway 90 in Houma at $9.40 an hour, with the kind, generous, small, careful weekly oversight of the Cypress Inn's 64-year-old front desk manager, Mrs. Imelda Fry, who had not asked any questions Mrs. Annette Doucet had not, in advance, asked her to stop asking. Cecile Bertrand had, on the 3rd of December, moved into the small, clean two-room apartment above the Boudreaux family's shrimp dock office at $325 a month. She had, in the 4 years that followed, attended St. Anthony Catholic Mission every Sunday morning at 10 with Mrs. Hortense Boudreaux. She had eaten every Friday evening the small, careful Cajun supper Mrs. Hortense had made at the small kitchen table of the Boudreaux dock office. She had on most evenings walked the small, careful three-block loop down Plant Avenue and back at dusk. She had not, in any of those 4 years, gone north of Huma's city limits. She had not, in any of those 4 years, been to New Orleans. She had not, in any of those 4 years, knowingly seen a single photograph of Mr. Marius Hebert, Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais, the Magnolia Tower on Poydras Street, or any one of the small, careful Esplanade Avenue houses she had once, for 9 years of her short life, lived in. The Boudreaux had, on the small, careful evening of the second Friday in September of the first year, on Mrs. Hortense Boudreaux's quiet initiative, set out at the small kitchen table of the small, clean two-room apartment above the dock office, a small, careful blue St. Anthony of Padua holy card, and a small, careful chipped white ceramic dish. In the small, careful, Cajun Catholic way, Mrs. Hortense had been taught at her own grandmother's kitchen table in Cocodrie in 1962. Cécile had, on every evening of those 4 years and 3 months, set down in the small ceramic dish at the foot of the holy card the same small, careful, single-folded yellow paper note that read only, in her small, careful, steady cursive, St. Anthony, finder of lost things. Help me, please, find my name. The note had been the only thing she had ever, in the 4 years and 3 months, asked St. Anthony for. She had set it down and lit and let burn out on each of 1,558 evenings. The first of the small, careful memory fragments had come back on the morning of the 23rd of February of this year, 6 months and 1 week before the Wednesday morning at the Magnolia Tower service entrance. Cécile had been, on that February morning, standing at the small front kitchen window of the apartment above the dock office watching Mr. Bertrand Boudreaux loading a small bushel of fresh white shrimp onto the back of his pickup truck for a Friday afternoon delivery to Restaurant Auguste on Tchoupitoulas in New Orleans. She had thought, very suddenly, in a small, careful, unbidden held second, of a small, careful blue plate of a Friday night seafood and grits supper at a small, careful corner table at Restaurant Auguste. She had thought of the small, careful pinstripe pattern of a navy blue suit jacket folded across the back of the chair across from her. She had thought of the small, careful inscription on the inside of a small antique silver wedding band she had been, in that small, careful held second, somehow remembering having taken off a man's left ring finger and laid on the small, careful tablecloth between them. The inscription, in the small, careful held second, had been a name, Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June. The year had been illegible. Cécile had, at the held second, said very softly to herself, Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June. The held second had passed. The memory had, with the held second, gone. Cécile had, in the moment after, thought, Cher, have I been Aurélie? The thought, like the held second, had passed. Mr. Bertrand Boudreaux had pulled out of the dockyard at 4:11. Cécile had gone back to the small, careful Friday night ledger of the Cypress Inn Motel cleaning rotation she had been balancing at the small kitchen table. In the 6 months that followed, the small, careful held seconds had come more often. By the 3rd week of June, Cécile had, in a small, careful, private blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook on the pine nightstand by her bed, written down 41 held second fragments. The fragments had included, by the end of August, the small, careful name Aurélie said in a man's careful, warm, low voice. The small, careful gold St. Augustine Catholic Church medal of a small black grandmother in a wide cream felt church hat on Paris Avenue in Gentilly. The small, careful smell of beignets and chicory coffee at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The small, careful pattern of magnolia blossoms on a small, careful porcelain breakfast cup. And in the last week of August, in a small, careful held minute that had taken her by her own kitchen sink for the length of perhaps 6 soft, careful breaths, the small, careful held image of a young man in a pinstripe navy three-piece suit, standing at the foot of a tall, pale yellow plaster colonial-style townhouse on Esplanade Avenue, with a small, careful bouquet of white roses in his right hand and a small, careful key in his left, and a small, careful held expression of a young man waiting on a porch. On the 2nd of September, Cécile had said, at supper at the small kitchen table of the Boudreaux dock office, very quietly, "Mr. Bertrand, Mrs. Hortense, I have since February been remembering small, careful pieces. The pieces last week included a young man on Esplanade Avenue. I have, with your permission, decided to take a small, careful job in New Orleans. A cleaning agency in Mid-City has placed me on a third-shift cleaning crew at a tower on Poydras Street. The shift starts on the 24th. I will, with your permission, keep the apartment. I will commute on the bus." Mr. Bertrand Boudreaux had said, "Cher, the Lord, in my private opinion, has been waiting on you to decide to do something like this since the morning of the 17th. Take the job. The apartment, cher, is yours. The doc will, cher, watch the apartment for you. Hortense will, cher, watch the small, careful church candle she has been lighting for you on Saturday evening since the 17th. Mrs. Hortense Boudreaux had said, "Cher, the candle is lit. Take the job. Bring back, cher, what you bring back." Cécile had taken the job. She had ridden on the morning of the 24th, the 4:53 Greyhound bus from Houma to New Orleans, and had walked, with her small, worn, green canvas tote bag, the 7 blocks from the Loyola Avenue Greyhound Terminal, to the Belle Rive Cleaning Services office on Tulane Avenue at 6:58. She had met Miss Léonie Lefranc on the small, careful front porch of the Belle Rive office at 6:59. Miss Léonie had, on Cécile's having walked up the porch steps, looked at her for the length of perhaps 3 slow, careful, held seconds. Miss Léonie had said, "Child, the supervisor is not this morning on the porch. I will be the supervisor on the porch. Sit down on the bench. We will, child, drink a small cup of chicory coffee and talk through your small, careful first week schedule." Cécile had not, on Miss Léonie's 3 slow, careful held seconds, noticed the held seconds. Miss Léonie had not on the porch said anything more. Miss Léonie had, in fact, in the held seconds, recognized, on the strength of the small, careful crescent of a 32-year-old plus-size African-American woman's full figure and the small, careful tilt of her head and the small, careful held watchfulness in her dark, almond-shaped eyes. The small, careful young woman she had, 26 years earlier, watched her closest choir mate at St. Augustine Catholic Church on Paris Avenue in Gentilly carry up the small, careful side aisle of the church to the small, careful baptismal font on the morning of the 3rd of July, 1992. The choir mate's name had been Mrs. Marisol Adelaide Beaumarchais. Mrs. Marisol Adelaide Beaumarchais had been by then the wife of the prominent New Orleans real estate and cotton broker Mr. Maximilien Beaumarchais, of the Beaumarchais family of Esplanade Avenue. The young woman she had been carrying to the font had been her 4-month-old daughter, Aurélie. Miss Léonie Lefranc had not, on her recognition of the 4 held seconds on the porch, told Cécile Bertrand. She had not, on the morning of the 24th of August, told anyone at all. She had only, on the small, careful evening of the 24th at her own small Gentilly bungalow on Marais Street 4 blocks south of St. Augustine Catholic Church, sat down at her own small kitchen table with a small ceramic mug of warm chicory coffee and a small worn brown leather St. Augustine choir record book of 1992, and had read, very carefully, by the soft yellow light of a single brass desk lamp, the small careful entry she had made, in her own careful old-fashioned cursive, on the morning of the 3rd of July of 1992. Today, at 10:15 Mass, my closest choir mate Marisol Beaumarchais carried her 4-month-old baby Aurélie up the side aisle to the baptismal font. Father Pierre baptized the baby. Aurélie's eyes are her grandmother's. May the Lord bless this child. Léonie Mavis Lefranc, soprano section. She had laid the choir record book down. She had walked to the small, careful telephone on the kitchen wall. She had dialed Mrs. Solange Pichot, 91 years old that September, the long-retired St. Augustine choir mistress of 1992, who had been, since the quiet passing of her own husband in 2004, alone in her small, careful Gentilly cottage on Allen Street, 4 blocks east of Léonie's. Mrs. Solange Pichot had answered on the second ring. She had said, "Léonie, it is Léonie, after 8 in the evening. I am Léonie in my robe." Léonie had said, "Solange, forgive me. I have, on this morning at 6:59, on the small, careful porch of the Belle-Rive Cleaning Services office on Tulane Avenue, on the small, careful evidence of a small, careful tilt of the head and a small, careful held watchfulness in a pair of dark almond-shaped eyes, met, in my private opinion, Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert." Mrs. Solange Pichot had not, for a long-held minute, spoken. She had said very quietly, "Léonie, the Lord." Léonie had said, "Yes, Solange, the Lord." Mrs. Solange Pichot had said, "Léonie, watch her. Do not, Léonie, on the strength of one held second on a porch, say anything to her or to her husband. We will, Léonie, on the strength of 3 held seconds, say something. Watch." Léonie had said, "Solange, I will watch." Léonie had, in the 4 weeks that followed, between the morning of the 24th of August and the humid Wednesday morning of the 24th of September at the Magnolia Tower service entrance, said nothing more to anyone about the held seconds on the porch. She had instead watched. She had watched the small, careful, unhurried way Miss Cécile Bertrand polished the brass hardware on the front lobby revolving door at 6:05 every morning. She had watched the small, careful, unhurried way Cécile addressed the security guard, Mr. Othniel Talbot, 68, who had been at the Magnolia Tower since 2004, as "Mr. Talbot, sir, good evening every evening at 6:09, and Mr. Talbot, sir, good morning every morning at 1:52. She had watched the small, careful, unhurried way Cécile, on the second Wednesday at 1:27 in the morning, had, in the small, careful 35th floor archives, set down the small canister vacuum and had stood, very still, for the length of perhaps 4 held breaths, in front of the small, careful frame black and white wedding photograph of Mr. Marius Sébastien Hébert and Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert at Saint Louis Cathedral on the morning of the 7th of June in the year of 2019, that hung on the south wall of the archive room. Cécile had, on the second Wednesday at 1:27, looked at the framed black and white photograph. She had not, in those held breaths, recognized the bride. She had not, in those held breaths, recognized the groom. She had, however, in the 4th held breath, suddenly remembered, very clearly, the small, careful inscription on the inside of the silver wedding band on the bride's small, careful left ring finger. Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June, 2019. She had said, very softly, to no one in particular, "Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June, 2019. She had picked the canister vacuum back up. She had vacuumed the small, careful corner of the archive room rug. She had, at 1:33, moved on to the 36th floor. Miss Léonie Lefranc, who had been, on the second Wednesday at 1:27, standing at the small, careful door frame of the 35th floor archive room out of Cécile's line of sight, with a small dustcloth in her right hand and a small, worn pair of plain reading glasses on a thin silver chain at her neck, had, on Cécile's having said the small, careful inscription aloud, laid her right hand briefly against the doorframe for the length of perhaps 4 held seconds. She had then, with the small, slow, careful unhurriedness of a 71-year-old supervisor, who had, since the morning of the 2nd of September, been waiting for the small, careful Wednesday morning of this exact shape, walked to the small, careful staff break room on the 35th floor, sat down at the small Formica break room table, opened her small, worn personal address book, and called on her small, careful Belle Reeve Cleaning Services flip phone, the small, careful office number of Mrs. Solange Pichot, 91 years old that September, who had been the St. Augustine Catholic Church choir mistress in 1992, on the morning Leonie had watched Marisol carry the small 4-month-old Aurelie to the baptismal font, and who had, in the years since Marisol's quiet passing of pancreatic cancer in 2007, kept careful private custody of the small, careful St. Augustine choir record book of 1992. Miss Leonie had said, in the small, careful, low voice she used for things the Lord, in her private opinion, was watching. Solange, the young woman at the Magnolia Tower I telephoned you about on the 3rd of September. I have, this morning, watched her say a small, careful inscription aloud at a framed wedding photograph of the Hebert wedding. The inscription was the inscription on the back of the small black and white photograph in the choir record book at Marisol's baptism. Solange. The young woman, in my private opinion, is Aurélie Beaumarchais Hebert. The Lord, Solange, has, in fact, brought her back. Mrs. Solange Pichot had said, Leonie, the Lord, in my private opinion, has been bringing her back since the morning of the 17th of August 4 years and 3 months earlier. We will, Leonie, on this Wednesday morning, sit her down. Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had been, on the morning of the second Wednesday in late September, in his 33rd floor corner office at the Magnolia Tower since 5:43 in the morning, working on a small, careful printed quarterly board memorandum on the projected fiscal year impact of a small, careful proposed $840 million Magnolia Maritime acquisition of a smaller Tampa-based bulk carrier concern called the Alemany Trucking and Transit Company. He had been that morning 35 years old. He had been a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man with deep, warm brown skin, short, neatly groomed black hair clipped in a sharp, low fade, a full, close-trimmed black beard threaded faintly with silver at the jawline, calm, careful dark brown eyes behind thin silver wireframe reading glasses, and the small, held quiet watchfulness of a 35-year-old man who had not, in 4 years and 3 months, had a Saturday morning supper at the small oak kitchen table of the small pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse with anyone except his housekeeper, Mrs. Hortense Lavalier. He had been the only son of the late Mr. Etienne Hebert and the late Mrs. Eulalie Hebert of the Hebert family of Trem. He had founded Magnolia Maritime in the second year of his late father's quiet decline, on a small, careful $3 million inheritance, and on the small, careful generosity of his late father-in-law, Mr. Maximilien Beaumarchais, who had quietly co-signed the original $10 million Hibernia Bank line of credit on the morning of the 3rd of January of the year 2012. Marius had grown the company, in the 13 years that followed, from a small, careful 3-tug New Orleans inland port services concern to a small, careful $63 million Gulf of Mexico bulk and container shipping concern, with a small, careful headquarters in the Magnolia Tower and a small, careful inland port operation in Mobile, and a small, careful container services operation in Galveston. He had married Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais on the morning of the 7th of June of 2019 at St. Louis Cathedral on Jackson Square. He had buried her, in the small, careful absence of a body, at Lafayette Cemetery No. 1 on the afternoon of the 17th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier, on the strength of a small, careful Louisiana civil court order obtained, with great unhurried care, by his late mother-in-law's only surviving sister, Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley, 63 years old that February, who had pushed with the small, careful, unstated steadiness of a sister-in-law who had, for some careful private reasons of her own, been waiting for the death certificate to have the small, careful, highly probable death provision of the Louisiana Civil Code article 3029 invoked at the 6-month mark rather than the 7-year statutory waiting period. The small, careful private reasons of Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had been, on the small, careful private record of a small, careful private trust filed by Mr. Maximilian Beaumarchais at Adams and Reese LLP in 1995 at the time of his daughter Aurelie's 3rd birthday and never amended, that the small, careful Beaumarchais family trust held in the late Mr. Maximilian Beaumarchais's name, a small, careful $15 million reversion to the eldest living Beaumarchais provision in the event that the trust's primary beneficiary, Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais, died without issue. On the 17th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier, by the operation of the early death certificate Eugenie had pushed for, the trust's $15 million had reverted to Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley. Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had, since the 3rd of March 4 years and 3 months earlier, been quietly drawing on the trust at a small, careful 2% annual rate, while keeping the principal carefully invested in small, careful Louisiana municipal bonds at her own preferred Adams and Reese LLP estate trust officer, Mr. Webster Comeau. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had not, in the 4 years and 3 months since the 17th of February, known about the small, careful $15 million reversion provision. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had not, in the 4 years and 3 months since, known that Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had, on the morning of the 11th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier, 6 days before the civil court order, met privately at Mr. Webster Comeau's small, careful Adams and Reese LLP corner office on Common Street to discuss the precise statutory mechanics of the early death certificate provision. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had also not, in the 4 years and 3 months since, known that on the afternoon of the 12th of August, 4 years and 3 months earlier, while Aurélie had been on the Catalina sailboat on Lake Pontchartrain, Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had been at the small, careful luncheon table of the Antoine's restaurant private back room with Mr. Webster Comeau, drinking a glass of small, careful 2014 Chapelet Cabernet, 2 hours and 7 minutes before the thunderstorm that would, at 4:34 in the afternoon, snap the second spreader on Aurélie's mast. At 7:04 on the morning of the 24th of September, Miss Léonie Lefranc had walked, in her small, careful Belle Rive Cleaning Services blue and white striped supervisor's shirt, and her small, careful gray work pants, and her small, careful white cotton orthopedic flats. The 11 steps from the Magnolia Tower's 3rd shift staff break room on the 35th floor to the small, careful private side door of Mr. Marius Hébert's executive suite on the 33rd floor. She had, with the small, careful, quiet courtesy of a 71-year-old Belle Rive Cleaning Services supervisor of 34 years' tenure, knocked twice softly on the side door with the back of her right knuckle. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had said, yes. Miss Léonie had said, Mr. Hébert, sir. Léonie Lefranc, Belle Rive Cleaning Services. I have, sir, on this Wednesday morning, a small, careful private matter I would like, sir, with great unhurried respect to bring to your attention. The matter, sir, will, on the small, careful evidence I have, take 7 minutes of your time. I will, sir, on the strength of the small, careful evidence ask, of you, only one thing. I will ask, sir, that you walk with me in the next 7 minutes to the small, careful 3rd shift cleaning rotation on the 35th floor archives. And look, sir, at the small, careful cleaning attendant who is, at this moment, polishing the small, careful brass hardware on the small, careful door of the archives. I will, sir, after you have looked, leave you to your morning. May I, sir, with your permission, ask the 7 minutes? Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had laid down his fountain pen on the small, careful printed quarterly board memorandum. He had taken off his thin silver wire-frame reading glasses. He had laid them on the desk. He had said, "Ms. Lefranc?" "Yes." He had risen. He had taken from the brass coat tree at the corner of his office his small, careful charcoal gray suit jacket. He had put it on. He had walked with Miss Lefranc the small, careful elevator ride from the 33rd floor to the 35th, the small, careful walk along the polished 35th floor corridor, and had, at exactly 7:09 in the morning, stopped at the small open door of the 35th floor archives. At the small, careful brass hardware of the door, with a small, soft, careful white cotton polishing cloth in her right hand and a small, careful tin of Brasso in her left. Polishing in the small, careful, unhurried six-stroke pattern her Belle Reve Cleaning Services first week training manual had specified was the 32-year-old plus-size African-American woman in the small, careful blue and white striped Belle Reve third shift uniform who had not, since the 17th of August 4 years and 3 months earlier, said her own name aloud. She had not, on the small, careful, soft footsteps in the corridor, looked up. Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had, in those held seconds before Miss Leonie Lefranc spoke, taken in the small, careful crescent of a 32-year-old plus-size African-American woman's full figure in the small, careful blue and white striped Belle Reve supervisor's apron, the small, careful, unhurried six-stroke pattern of her cloth on the brass, the small, careful held tilt of her head, and the small, careful soft hum she was humming under her breath, which had been in the small, careful private memory he had not allowed himself to revisit in 4 years and 3 months. The small, careful, soft hum Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hebert had hummed at every Saturday breakfast at the small oak kitchen table on the second floor of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse for 2 years and 1 month. The hum had been on his careful private record, a small, careful Cajun lullaby Aurélie's grandmother on the St. Bernard Parish back porch had taught her, called Fais dodo, cher. He had, on the held seconds of the soft hum, laid his right hand briefly against the corridor wall. Miss Leonie Lefranc had said, very quietly, "Mr. Hebert, sir. You may, sir, with my careful, unhurried permission, breathe." Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had said, "Leonie, forgive me, the hum, Leonie." Miss Leonie had said, "Sir, yes, the hum. Speak to her, sir. The Lord, sir, has been waiting for the corridor." Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had not, for the length of perhaps 11 slow, careful held seconds, breathed. Miss Leonie Lefranc had said, very quietly, "Cécile, baby, stop polishing. There is a gentleman in the corridor who would very gently like to see your face." The cleaning attendant had, on Miss Leonie's word, stopped polishing. She had set down the polishing cloth on the small, careful blue and white striped supervisor's apron at her waist. She had set down the small, careful tin of Brasso on the small, careful service cart beside her. She had turned, with the small, careful, unhurried courtesy her grandmother on the St. Bernard Parish back porch had taught her, toward the corridor. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes had met Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert's calm, careful dark brown eyes for the length of perhaps 4 soft, careful held seconds. She had not, in those 4 held seconds, recognized him. Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had, in those 4 held seconds, recognized her. He had said, in the small, careful held voice of a 35-year-old man who had not, in 4 years and 3 months, said the name aloud in any public hallway, Aurélie. The cleaning attendant had, on the name, gone very still. She had laid her small, careful right hand against the door frame. She had looked at Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert with the small, careful held watchfulness of a woman who had, since the morning of the 17th of August 4 years and 3 months earlier, been Cécile Bertrand of Houma, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. She had said very softly, "Sir, forgive me. My name is Cécile Bertrand. I have, sir, in fact, since the 3rd week of February, Been remembering in small, careful held seconds a small, careful inscription on the inside of a silver wedding band that read, Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June, 2019. I do not, sir, on this Wednesday morning know who Aurélie was. I do not, sir, on this Wednesday morning know who Marius was. I am asking you, sir, on this Wednesday morning, in the corridor of the 35th floor archives of the tower at which I have, for 5 weeks, been polishing the brass. Only one small, careful question. Are you, sir, the man Aurélie wrote that inscription to? Mr. Marius Sebastian Haber had said, in a voice that had, in those 4 years and 3 months, not been quite this voice, Ma'am, I am. I am the man, ma'am, you wrote that inscription to. I have, ma'am, in fact, on the inside of the silver wedding band on my left ring finger on this Wednesday morning, the small, careful matching inscription that reads, Marius. To Aurélie, the 7th of June, 2019. I have, ma'am, in fact, since the 17th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier, every single morning of every single week, said the name Aurélie aloud in the small, careful, private kitchen of the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse at 5:43 in the morning against a small, careful, chipped blue ceramic mug of warm chicory coffee Mrs. Hortense Lavalier had laid out for me on the small oak kitchen table. The kitchen, ma'am, is on the second floor of the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse at the corner of Esplanade and Marais. The small oak kitchen table was, ma'am, the table at which you ate, on most Saturday mornings, the small, careful biscuits and fig preserves breakfast Mrs. Hortense Lavalier made you. I have not, ma'am, in 4 years and 3 months, sat at that table for breakfast with anyone except Mrs. Hortense Lavalier. I will not, ma'am, on this Wednesday morning, ask you anything more than the small, careful question that is, in any honest accounting, the only one I am, this morning, able to ask. May I, ma'am, with the careful, unhurried permission of Miss Léonie Lefranc, and the careful, unhurried permission of Miss Léonie Lefranc and the Ida, to the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse at the corner of Esplanade and Marais, and ask Mrs. Hortense Lavalier to sit you, ma'am, at the small oak kitchen table on the second floor, and to lay out for you, ma'am, a small, careful, chipped, blue ceramic mug of warm chicory coffee, and to slice for you, ma'am, a small, careful biscuit and fig preserves breakfast, and to allow you, ma'am, on the strength of one small, careful Wednesday morning's biscuit, to find out, ma'am, whether the kitchen, the chicory, and the fig preserves are, in fact, the small, careful kitchen, the small, careful chicory, and the small, careful fig preserves you, ma'am, before the 17th of August, 4 years and 3 months earlier, ate every Saturday morning. May I, ma'am, ask that? The cleaning attendant had not for a long held minute spoken. She had then said very quietly, Sir. Yes. She had said it in the small, careful voice she had, in fact, never in her 4 years as Cécile Bertrand used. She had said it in a small, careful voice that was, on the small, unstated evidence of Miss Léonie Lefranc, and on the small, careful, private knowledge of every cell in her own 32-year-old plus-size body, the small, careful voice of Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert. Miss Léonie Lefranc had said, very softly, Baby, the Lord. The 32-year-old woman had said, very softly, Yes, Miss Lefranc, the Lord. Mr. Cordell Ducharme, 60 years old that September, who had been Mr. Marius Sebastian Haber's longtime driver since 2014, had been, at noon on the 24th of September, at the front passenger drop-off of the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse with the engine of the family's black Lincoln town car running and the dome light off. Mr. Marius Sebastian Hebert had walked on Mr. Cordell Ducharme's careful courtesy of the rear passenger door. The 32-year-old woman in the small, careful Belle Rive third-shift uniform up the small, careful brick walk, and the small, careful three-painted wooden front porch steps and through the small, careful front door of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse at 1206. Mrs. Hortense Lavalier, the housekeeper for 21 years, had been waiting in the small, careful front foyer with a small, careful folded white linen apron in her hand and a small, careful tray of breakfast already set on the second-floor kitchen table. She had, on Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert's having said only, Hortense, the kitchen, walked with them in the small, careful Creole grandmother way she had walked with Aurélie 10,000 times, up the small, careful curving front staircase to the second floor, into the warm, yellow, careful kitchen with the yellow checked curtains at the window and the small, careful, chipped, blue ceramic mug of warm chicory coffee on the table. Mrs. Hortense Lavalier had said only, on the woman's having walked into the kitchen, "Cher, sit down, eat the biscuit. The fig preserves are on the small saucer. The chicory, Cher, is fresh. We have, Cher, been keeping them warm for 4 years and 3 months." The 32-year-old woman had sat down at the small oak kitchen table. She had picked up the small, careful, chipped blue ceramic mug. She had taken one small, careful, slow sip of the warm chicory coffee. She had set the mug down. She had laid both her small, careful hands flat across her face. She had wept, very quietly, for the length of perhaps 11 held minutes, with Mrs. Hortense Lavalier's broad, warm, dark hand on her right shoulder, and Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert seated across the small oak kitchen table with both his hands flat on the table between them, the small, careful matching silver wedding band on his left ring finger catching the warm, yellow kitchen light. When she had finished weeping, she had picked up the chicory again. She had looked across the kitchen table at Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert. She had said very softly, "Marius, Cher, the biscuit on the saucer is, in fact, mine." Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had, very gently, reached across the table and had laid his right hand carefully across her left. He had said, "Cher, welcome home, Cher." The small, careful private investigation, Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert's longtime general counsel, a calm, patient 64-year-old retired Loyola law professor named Mr. Vidal Boutin, had quietly opened on the morning of the 25th of September, the day after Aurélie had returned to the Esplanade Avenue townhouse, had reviewed the small, careful Adams and Reese LLP estate trust file of Mr. Maximilien Beaumarchais' 1995 family trust, the small, careful luncheon receipt records of Antoine's restaurant for the afternoon of the 12th of August, 4 years and 3 months earlier, the small, careful Adams and Reese LLP appointment book of Mr. Webster Comeau for the morning of the 11th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier, and the small, careful Louisiana Civil District Court file in which Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had filed with the assistance of Mr. Webster Comeau the early death certificate petition under Louisiana Civil Code Article 3029. Mr. Vidal Boutin had, on the morning of the 2nd of October, laid before Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert, in the small first-floor study of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse, a small, careful printed 17-page memorandum with the small, careful one-paragraph summary at the top, reading, Marius. Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley committed estate fraud. The $15 million trust reversion is unwindable on first principles. Mr. Webster Comeau's role in the early death certificate petition is, in my private opinion, prosecutable. We will, on your instruction, file a small, careful private civil action this Friday in Civil District Court, and a small, careful private referral to the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office on Monday morning. Vidal. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had read the memorandum. He had laid it on the small first-floor study desk. He had said only, Vidal, file both. He had then risen, walked up the small, careful, curving front staircase to the second floor, and had stood for a long, held 3 minutes at the small, careful door of the small front bedroom on the second floor, at the back of the house where Aurelie was, at that moment, asleep on the small, careful single twin bed with the small, soft yellow knit baby hat the size of a peach pressed gently against her cheek. He had not, on the threshold, spoken. He had only watched, for the length of perhaps 11 held breaths, the small, careful, steady rise and fall of her sleeping shoulders. He had said, very softly, in a voice she did not in her sleep hear, "Maximilian, sir. I will, sir, on this Friday with Vidal. File the things you would, sir, in any honest accounting have filed yourself." Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais. Riley had been served on the morning of the 3rd of October at the small, careful kitchen table of her small, careful Audubon Place house by Mr. Vidal Boutin's process server with the small, careful civil action. The $15 million trust reversion had, by the 3rd week of November, on the strength of the small, careful Louisiana Civil District Court order signed by Judge Marceline Fouché, been unwound. Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley had, by the 2nd week of December, been formally indicted by the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office on 3 small, careful counts of estate fraud and 1 small, careful count of conspiracy. Miss Webster Comeau, on the small, careful evidence of the Adams and Reese LLP appointment book, had been disbarred by the Louisiana State Bar Association on the morning of the 7th of January, and had subsequently entered a small, careful guilty plea to 1 count of conspiracy in exchange for a small, careful 3-year suspended sentence and the surrender of his Louisiana real estate license. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais. Hébert had, in the small, careful, unhurried meantime, moved into the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse on the afternoon of the 24th of September, with the small, careful, unhurried, emotional pace of a 32-year-old woman who had been, for 4 years and 3 months, somebody else. She had, on the small, careful, kind insistence of Mrs. Hortense Lavalier, who had cooked her on every morning of those 4 years and 3 months, the breakfast she had not, in those 4 years and 3 months, been able to eat, slept in the small front bedroom on the 2nd floor at the back of the house, not on the small, careful private agreement Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had made with her on the afternoon of the 24th of September in the small, careful master bedroom on the 3rd floor she had once shared with him, until the small, careful afternoon of the 3rd Sunday of November, when she had, on her own small, careful, unhurried initiative, walked up the small, careful, curving front staircase from the 2nd floor to the 3rd floor, opened the small, careful master bedroom door, walked across the small, careful, hand-knotted Persian rug that had been her late grandmother's, sat down on the foot of the small, careful, 4-poster mahogany bed, looked across the room at Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert, who had been seated quietly at the small, careful walnut writing desk by the window, reading the Sunday Times Picayune, and had said, very softly, "Marius, share, the 3rd floor, share." Yes, Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had, very gently, set the Sunday Times Picayune down. He had risen, with the small, careful unhurriedness of a 35-year-old man who had, for 4 years and 3 months, slept alone in a small, careful 4-poster mahogany bed under a single oil portrait of his late mother-in-law, Mrs. Marisol Adelaide Beaumarchais. He had walked the small, careful 11 steps from the walnut writing desk to the foot of the bed. He had, at the foot of the bed, sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her on the small, careful Persian rug. He had said very softly, "Aurélie, cher. Welcome home again, cher." Aurélie had not, for a long-held minute, spoken. She had then said, very softly, "Cher, the Lord, in my private opinion, has done a small, careful Sunday afternoon's work this Sunday afternoon. Read to me, cher, what is on the front page of the Times Picayune." Marius had, for the first time in 4 years and 3 months, picked up the Sunday Times Picayune and read aloud, in the small, careful, low voice he had, on every Saturday morning of their 3-year marriage before the 17th of August, read the front page of the Sunday Times Picayune to her at breakfast, the front page item on the small, careful local politics column. Aurelie had, by the third paragraph, fallen asleep against his shoulder. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had, on the morning of the 25th of September, sat with Mr. Vidal-Boutin in the small, careful first-floor study of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse for 1.5 hours and had asked Mr. Vidal-Boutin to do 4 small, careful things with the small, careful, unhurried discretion the Hébert family had paid Mr. Vidal-Boutin's firm for since 1998. Mr. Vidal-Boutin had agreed. The 4 small, careful things had been, first, to file a small, careful private petition with the Louisiana Civil District Court to vacate the small, careful, highly probable death order of the 17th of February, 4 years and 3 months earlier. Second, to coordinate quietly with Mr. Bertrand Boudreau of the Pointe aux Chenes Inlet on the small, careful documentation of the small, careful Cajun shrimp dock chain of custody for the 4 years and 3 months. Third, to engage a small, careful Loyola University clinical psychologist named Dr. Cordelia Vanoy for a small, careful private therapeutic schedule for Mrs. Aurélie Beaumarchais Hébert at the small, careful private practice on Octavia Street. And fourth, to begin with the small, careful, unstated Adams and Reese LLP appointment book trail and the Antoine's Restaurant private backroom receipt records. The small, careful private investigation of Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais Riley's role in the early death certificate petition on the small, careful, unstated Hébert family suspicion that the petition had been, in fact, financially motivated. The careful, slow reintegration of Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert into her own small, careful life had taken, on the small, careful, private therapeutic schedule of Dr. Cordelia Vanoy, the next 11 months. Aurélie had attended Dr. Cordelia Vanoy's small, careful private practice on Octavia Street twice a week for the entirety of the 11 months. She had, on the 3rd week of October, traveled with Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert and Mrs. Hortense Boudreau back to the Boudreau shrimp dock at the Pointe aux Chenes Inlet, in order to, in the small, careful, unhurried words Dr. Cordelia Vanoy had written on the small, careful prescription pad, complete the small, careful figure 8 loop of the Lord's reintegration. Mrs. Hortense Boudreau had, on Aurélie's having walked into the small, careful Boudreau dock office on the afternoon of the 3rd Saturday of October, taken her into both her arms for the length of perhaps 11 held minutes, and had said only, "Cher, the candle, cher, is lit." Aurélie had said, "Mrs. Hortense, thank you for the 4 years and 3 months." Mr. Bertrand Boudreau had said, on his front porch, only, "Cher, come back on the Friday afternoons. Come back, share with the husband. We will share eat the shrimp." Aurélie had said, "Mr. Bertrand, we will." She had, on the small, careful, private clinical advice of Dr. Cordelia Vanoy, and on her own small, careful, private decision, in the small, careful master bedroom of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse, on the morning of the 14th of December, when she had taken from the small, careful top drawer of the walnut writing desk by the window the small, soft, yellow knit baby hat the size of a peach she had, on the small, careful Friday afternoon of the 11th of August 4 years and 3 months earlier, bought at the small, careful baby and children's boutique on Magazine Street, sat down on the foot of the small, careful 4-poster mahogany bed, and had said softly to the small, soft, yellow knit baby hat, "Cher, forgive Mama Cher the 4 years. Forgive Mama Cher the lake. Mama Cher is back. Mama Cher will, in the fullness of the Lord's appointed time, do the small, careful walk again." She and Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert had, on the morning of the 3rd of June of the year that followed, in fact welcomed a healthy 6-pound, 11-ounce baby girl named Marisol Léonie Hébert, named for Aurélie's late mother and for Miss Léonie Lafront, the 71-year-old Belle Rive Cleaning Services supervisor, who had, on the morning of the 24th of September, recognized on the strength of a small, careful inscription in a small, careful St. Augustine choir record book. The 4-month-old daughter she had watched her own closest choir mate, Mrs. Marisol Adelaide Beaumarchais, carry up the small, careful side aisle to the baptismal font on the morning of the 3rd of July, 1992. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert and Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais. Hébert had renewed their wedding vows at the small, careful St. Louis Cathedral on Jackson Square on the morning of the 7th of June of that year, on the small, careful 6th anniversary of their original wedding, in front of 140 guests. Father Octave Toussaint, the long-serving cathedral pastor of St. Louis, who had in fact married them on the 7th of June of 2019, had officiated. Miss Léonie Lefranc had been, on the small, careful insistence of Aurélie, the matron of honor. Mrs. Hortense Boudreau and Mr. Bertrand Boudreau had been, on the same small, careful insistence, the seated guests of honor in the front pew of the bride's side. Mrs. Annette Doucet of Terrebonne General had been seated in the second pew. Mrs. Hortense Lavalier had cried the entire ceremony quietly into a small, soft white linen handkerchief Aurélie had given her on the morning of the wedding. Father Octave Toussaint had said every one of the words. He had, at the last, said, "Now, by the power vested in me by the Catholic Church of the Archdiocese of New Orleans and by the living God, I pronounce again Marius Sebastien Hébert and Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais, Hébert husband and wife. Mr. Hébert, you may again kiss your bride." Marius had very gently kissed his bride. Aurélie had, at the kiss, with the small, careful unhurriedness of a woman who had, for 4 years and 3 months, not been able to say her own name aloud in any public hallway, lifted with her small, careful right hand, the small, careful inside of her own left ring finger to her own mouth, and had read, in a small, careful, private, inaudible whisper, the small, careful inscription on the inside of the silver wedding band Marius had, on the morning of the 24th of September of the year before, returned to her finger at the small oak kitchen table on the second floor of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse. The inscription, in the small, careful, private whisper Aurélie had said only to herself, had read, "Aurélie, to Marius, the 7th of June, 2019. The inscription was the same inscription Aurélie had said aloud on the second Wednesday at 1:27 in the morning of the 11th of September of the year before, in the small, careful 35th floor archives, in front of the small, careful framed black and white wedding photograph that hung on the south wall. The small choir of St. Louis Cathedral had, at the kiss, broken into a slow, soft Mahalia Jackson recessional. Mrs. Solange Pichot, by then 92 and seated in the second pew beside Mrs. Annette Doucet, had, in the small, careful, private rehearsal of the Wednesday before, asked the choir to please prepare. Mr. Marius Sebastien Hébert and Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais Hébert were, after the vow renewal, married for 24 further years. They had, in addition to little Marisol Léonie, 2 more children, a son they named Maximilien Bertrand Hébert, called Max, after Aurélie's late father and Mr. Bertrand Boudreau, who grew up to be a maritime and environmental law attorney at his godfather Mr. Vidal Boutin's old Loyola law firm, and a daughter they named Hortense Adelaide Hébert, called Tense, after Mrs. Hortense Lavalier and Mrs. Hortense Boudreau, who grew up to be a clinical neurologist at Tulane Medical Center. Mr. Bertrand Boudreau lived to be 89. He passed peacefully in his own bed at the small Boudreau dock office at the Pointe aux Chenes Inlet, with Mrs. Hortense Boudreau at his right side and Aurélie at his left, on a Friday afternoon in late spring, with a small, careful bushel of fresh white shrimp in a small, careful bucket of ice in the front yard, waiting for the next afternoon's Saturday delivery to Restaurant August. Mrs. Hortense Boudreau had passed 2 years later at 84 in the small, careful upstairs bedroom of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse, where Aurélie had quietly moved her after Mr. Bertrand's passing. Miss Léonie Lafrance had retired from Belle-Rive cleaning services at 81 and had, in the 8 remaining years of her life, taught a small, careful Tuesday afternoon St. Augustine Catholic Church choir girls' confirmation class to the small, careful soprano section of the St. Augustine Youth Choir at her own small, careful upright piano in her Gentilly bungalow. Mrs. Eugenie Beaumarchais. Riley served on the small, careful conviction of the Orleans Parish District Court in the second week of December, a small, careful 4-year sentence at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel. She had, on her release, moved quietly to her late husband's small, careful family house in Pass Christian, Mississippi. She did not, in the years that followed, see Aurélie or any of Aurélie's children again. She had, on the morning of her 74th birthday, mailed to the Esplanade Avenue townhouse a small, careful, unmarked manila envelope containing a small, careful, single handwritten page that read only, in her small, careful, old-fashioned cursive, Aurélie. I am sorry. I will, in the years remaining to me, ask the Lord for what I cannot ask of you. Eugenie. Aurélie had read the small, careful page in the small, careful kitchen on the second floor of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse with Mrs. Hortense Lavalier at her shoulder. She had, after the long-held minute, set the page down on the small oak kitchen table. She had said only very quietly to Mrs. Hortense Lavalier, Aunt Eugenie, in fact, did the asking. I will not this morning write back. The Lord, in my private opinion, can run the rest. She had folded the small, careful page into the small, careful St. Augustine prayer book on the kitchen sideboard. Mrs. Hortense Lavalier had said, Cher, the Lord, Cher, can run the rest. Mrs. Aurélie Marisol Beaumarchais. Hébert had kept on the small, careful pine bookshelf in the small, careful upstairs sitting room of the Esplanade Avenue townhouse for the remaining 24 years of her marriage, the small, worn blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook she had begun, in the small, careful upstairs apartment above the Boudreau dock office at the Pointe aux Chenes in Let. On the small, careful evening of the 23rd of February of the year, the small, careful held seconds had begun to come back. She had, in fact, kept all 25 of the notebooks she would, across the rest of her life, fill on the small, careful pine shelf. Her daughter, Hortense Adelaide Hébert, would, in the years that followed, edit and publish a small, thin volume of 321 of those sentences, under the title, The Held Second on a Wednesday Morning. The Night Notebooks of Aurélie Beaumarchais, Hébert. The first sentence in the book was the sentence Aurélie had written, in pencil, at 6:04 in the evening of the 24th of September, on the small, careful walnut writing desk by the window of the small front bedroom on the second floor at the back of the small, pale yellow Esplanade Avenue townhouse. After she had eaten the small, careful biscuit and fig preserves breakfast Mrs. Hortense Lavalier had laid out for her on the small oak kitchen table, and had, on Mrs. Hortense Lavalier's instructions, slept for the first time in 4 years and 3 months, with the small, soft yellow knit baby hat the size of a peach pressed gently to her cheek on the small, careful pillow of the small, careful single twin bed. It read, Today the Lord let me sit down again at my own kitchen table. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small, careful, inflatable belt-pack life jacket whose inflation cord catches on a stainless steel cleat at the third gust of a 61-knot Lake Pontchartrain thunderstorm is, in any honest accounting, the small, careful end of a 32-year-old woman's life. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small, careful Cajun shrimper's morning at 4:37 on the soft mud bank of a Pointe aux Chenes inlet is, in any honest accounting, the small, careful end of a young woman's name. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small, careful dissociative amnesia diagnosis at a small, careful Terrebonne General Medical Center on the 22nd of August is, in any honest accounting, the small, careful end of a wedding band's inscription. We disagree. This story was told for you tonight by a voice that loves you, for hearts that have carried more than their share. May the small, careful, soft mud bank of your own Pointe-aux-Chenes Inlet, on the morning of the 17th of August at 4:37, hold a small, careful Cajun shrimp dock owner who knows on the soft, careful, unmistakable sound of a body washing onto the bank what to do. May Mrs. Annette Doucet at your bedside on the morning of the 23rd of August give you, gently, a small, careful temporary name from her own mother's 1972 charity hospital, Jane Doe. May Miss Leonie Lefranc at the small, careful porch of the Belle Rive Cleaning Services office at 6:59 in the morning recognize on the small, careful tilt of your head the small, careful 4-month-old daughter she once watched her closest choir mate carry to the baptismal font. And may every small, careful held second of memory you have written in pencil in a small blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook on a pine nightstand above a Cajun shrimp dock on the Pointe-aux-Chenes Inlet be, in the fullness of the Lord's appointed time, read aloud 50 years from now by your own daughter in a small worn book that bears on its cover, in your own hand, the 8 words you wrote on the evening of the 24th of September. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.